All right, guys, so let's talk about something that's not so fun to talk about. Let's talk about why deals die here on Long Island. My name is Anthony Vito with Real Broker, and I'm going to take you through a couple of things that you're definitely going to want to pay attention to, whether you're listing your house or looking to buy a house, and the main reasons I'm seeing in today's market as an active real estate broker doing 30 plus deals a year on why these transactions are dying and what you could have done to actually avoid it. All right, so first things first, guys, I've been doing this for just about 10 years now, and I very rarely have deals still actually die when they're under contract. This isn't something that is happening all the time. So when you hear people saying that, oh, the deal died or something changed, it's usually actually before the property's even under contract. It's either during when the offer is accepted or you're doing the inspection period or they're working on contracts being signed that deals are actually falling apart. Being in a competitive market like we are today on Long Island, oftentimes buyers are submitting offers on multiple properties or they're jumping into something that they really aren't truly prepared for or have really thought through. But because there's such a rush in this market to try to actually get an offer accepted and get your foot in the door, sometimes buyers jump into things they're really just not prepared for. So I would say the number one reason that we're seeing deals actually die or fall through is that the buyer jumps into something they're not totally comfortable on. And the way our offer process works here on Long Island, that offer isn't binding, as everybody knows. When you're writing that offer, it isn't something that you actually have to stick to if your offer gets accepted. So that leaves a lot of wiggle room in the deal for a buyer to really just change their mind or submit an offer on something that they haven't really thought through. The best way to protect yourself against something like this is to make sure you're actually vetting that buyer that makes an offer on your property. If you're a seller, you're really going to want to make sure that your agent or your broker is actually verifying this buyer's financials. If they have a buyer's agent representing them, they've actually verified with them and the lender that the buyer has an actual pre-approval, that the pre-approval is up to date, that it actually correlates with the property. They understand the taxes in the property, they understand the insurance, they've looked at the financials on it, they know what their monthly payment is going to be. That's just on the financial side. You're also going to want to maybe ask some questions on, what brought them to the area, certain things like that you can try to bring up, to make sure that this will actually line up with something that they're looking for and that they didn't just jump into something. It's also okay to ask, which I'll sometimes do as a seller's agent, is this their number one choice? Do they have offers on other properties? Just so you can try to get an idea and ask some more questions to make sure that that buyer is totally involved. And again, a buyer can change their mind at any point when they've just made an offer on a property before they're under contract. But the more due diligence that you do, the more questions that you ask, and the more you qualify that buyer, likely it is that the buyer is actually going to go through with the purchase. Another major reason why deals are dying on Long Island is an issue with an inspection. Now, how one person looks at an issue with the home could be very different from the way somebody else looks at an inspection, depending on what it is, the buyer's experience, if the buyer knows anything about that. For example, if the buyer is in construction or they're an electrician or an HVAC tech or whatever they do, they may look at another item very differently than somebody who works full-time as a teacher and is buying a property, right? So you're definitely going to want to make sure you're understanding who the buyer is. But what I always recommend to my sellers, and I'll do this when I'm actually going through the property, is I'm just looking around, I'm seeing it, of course, trying to learn about the home, but I'm looking at the things that I've learned over the years that always come up on inspection reports, and that might seem like a little thing to that seller or to myself, someone who's been in the business, but to a buyer it can be scary. So we do have a pre-checklist that we're always going to give to our sellers so that they can review it, along with me actually doing a thorough walkthrough of the property before the property is listed. Now, on top of that, once we've gone through that checklist and we know that any leaks are checked, any P-traps under the sink, just little things, any open wiring boxes, things like that. But it's sometimes a good idea to also do a pre-inspection before you actually list the property. Let's say this is a property that's been in the family a long time. It hasn't been sold in a very long time. Maybe they haven't done too much upkeep to the home over years. In that case, sometimes I might say, hey, here's the licensed inspector that I work with. It might be a good idea to actually get them through the property beforehand, at least so we could try to knock down some of those things that I know the buyer is going to bring up when they do their inspection. This way they can't use it against us in any negotiation, and we know what to expect. I also think for this, setting proper expectations on the age of things for the home, making sure that when you're showing the property, you're explaining to buyers the things that might need to be updated, not in a bad way to discount the home, but giving people a heads up like, hey, the windows are all new, the roof is a little bit older, but at least you're getting their mindset and their head right. Not to draw attention to something negative, but at least that they understand what they're buying. So when they come to the home inspection, they're not completely surprised by what they're seeing on the report. But the biggest thing when it comes to an inspection is you just want to get rid of the little thing that you really don't need involved in the deal. So if you can tidy up a couple of things before you actually bring that property to market, it just protects you more as a seller. It keeps more leverage on your side when it comes to actually dealing with these things, and it gives the buyer less things to worry about, which eventually will put more money into your pocket as a seller. Now, if you're looking at this from a buyer's perspective when it comes to inspections, the best advice that I can give to you is make sure that you know what to expect from the inspection. So have a conversation with your broker, your buyer's agent, see if they have any recommendations, do your research on who the inspector is going to be, and also make sure you have a general idea of the systems of the home before you make an offer on that property. I've sold properties that have older heating systems that they've gone another 20 years out of just because the property's been maintained well. I've also sold properties, for example, and I've represented buyers to purchase them that have a brand new system. For example, maybe it's an AC or a heating system, but the system has not been maintained well and they've never had somebody in to take a look at the system. So although it's 5 years old, it's actually in worse condition than a system that might be older but has been maintained really well. So looking at those things from a buyer's perspective and knowing what to expect from that home inspection as much as you can will make sure that you're making an offer that actually lines up with one that's going to get done after the home inspection. And of course, you're going to want to make sure whoever you're using for your home inspection actually has a good idea of what they're looking at and they have some experience on inspecting those types of homes in that area. Another big reason we're seeing deals not go through here on Long Island is just a lack of transparency from the beginning. So maybe the seller doesn't explain to the buyer when they're accepting their offer that they might be looking to actually close in 30 days and get out of there because they've already got a home lined up. Or maybe it has to do with the condition of the home, or it has to do with the seller's need for not wanting to take a mortgage contingency, or whatever their requirements are. But if they didn't actually make that transparent when the offer was accepted or when the offer was made as a buyer, it's just going to get thrown into the mix once you get to that inspection period, the contract period. And more oftentimes than not, that being brought up later is a reason for the deal to actually die. Where if it was just brought up in the beginning and people knew what to expect and there was transparency on this issue or those needs, it wouldn't have been an issue in the first place. It would have just been something that both parties understood and then expected going forward. It's never a good feeling when a seller sends out a contract after a buyer made an offer that was accepted on a property and the terms in the contract are different than what was accepted in the offer. And the seller may use that, or the buyer may use that contract to change things in their favor or try to slip something through. In my experience, it never actually works out. Whenever you restart negotiations after something has already been agreed upon, it leaves a bad taste in the buyer or seller's mouth. So what I always try to do on my deals is just be transparent from the beginning. You have to know as a seller's broker what questions to ask your seller. And then when you're explaining that to the buyer or accepting their offer, leave nothing else open for negotiation. Make sure that all the terms are clear on the offer sheet. Whatever your client's needs are, whether it's a buyer or seller, I always make sure that their needs are clear and both parties know what to expect. So changing major terms between that offer and the actual contract that's going to bind the parties together is always a bad idea. Because our offers here are not actually binding until you get to the contract point, it's super important to keep your momentum going throughout the entire process. So what I like to do on my deals is make sure that everybody knows our timeline when we're going into that deal. When you make an offer on a property, I'll usually tell that seller's agent, and I'm representing a buyer, I say, hey, our inspector is available Friday, Saturday, Sunday at 3, 4, and 7, whatever the timing is. But I'm helping setting up this timeline because the biggest thing here is that you want to keep the momentum of the deal going. Oftentimes, sellers are still going to continue to show a property here on Long Island before the actual first buyer that they accepted actually signs a contract and puts a deposit down because nothing's binding the two together. So keeping that deal momentum going forward is super, super important. It's not that you want to rush parties into doing something or rushing to a contract. No, it's really just that you want to keep the deal moving forward so that everyone keeps a good feeling throughout it. This way, if something comes up, you're further ahead of other parties or you're further along from a competitive offer that for them to switch or change their mind or change terms would just create more chaos in the deal, and most parties aren't going to do that. That being said, some of that deal momentum is not totally up to me as the agent or the broker, and it's also not up to the buyer or the seller. Sometimes there's third parties involved, which of course we're going to have inspectors involved. We're going to have mortgage bankers involved if there's a mortgage in the deal, and we're also going to have a buyer and seller's attorney. It's super important that that attorney is going to keep that deal momentum going. What you don't want to happen is get your offer accepted, do a home inspection all within 48 to 72 hours. The seller's attorney sends out contracts to the buyer's attorney and doesn't get a response because it's Wednesday afternoon until the following Monday. Happens way too often here on Long Island, and you can't move forward without that attorney. So you want to make sure that you're working with an attorney who's not going to slow the deal down, Of course, you want one that's going to understand how to read a proper contract, understand to negotiate the right terms to protect you, but you want them to do it in a timely manner. You don't want to wait and drag this out, because time kills deals when it comes to these things. And because that offer is made without an actual deposit, you don't have anything till you have that contract. So make sure you're working with somebody who's not going to slow the deal down, but will keep it moving forward and just bring up any issues as they come up. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning into today's video about why transactions tend to die here on Long Island. As you can see, most of these issues are coming up actually before the home is even in contract. So doing your due diligence on front, whether you're a buyer or you're a seller, is super important for actually getting that deal to the finish line. Once the deals are actually under contract, if they are to go south, usually it's because of a major life-changing event that really neither side could have foreseen. As long as if the buyer is doing a mortgage, you're making sure that you're actually vetting their financials, you're making sure you're doing your due diligence on the property beforehand with the FOIL request, title search, or speaking with any of the local villages to make sure that the property is in good standing there. You're really unlikely to have any major issues unless something totally changes that's out of your control. And doing this for 10 years on Long Island, it's very, very, very unlikely that I do see deals fall apart once they're under contract if we've done all of those things. Thanks again for tuning in. My name is Anthony Vita with Real Broker here. And if you have any questions, comment anytime, or of course, message me directly on Instagram, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks so much.